With that, though, you had some questions about infrastructure. So I'm upset about infrastructure. I know you're upset about infrastructure. So maybe I'll just give you the floor first.
Well, for those who don't know you, Brederick, could you please tell us all what gives you the authority to speak on infrastructure and your disappointments or frustrations with it? And when I say infrastructure, I'm specifically talking about the built environment, things wrought by the human hand that keep us alive underground, on towers, in the air, in buildings, the things we build that keep us alive and the systems that connect them all together.
Exactly. Well, thank you for those very kind words, Don. I will say this. I grew up working construction. I worked construction up through college. I got a civil engineering degree as my undergrad degree, strictly in specifically in civil engineering from the University of Michigan, like big name school. I then ended up going out and getting a PhD from UC Berkeley on not proper civil engineering topics, but very much adjacent to that, specifically energy use in buildings and kind of advanced systems modeling techniques and that kind of thing. So I've been very much involved in this. Like I have literally built buildings with my bare hands. I love the built environment. And then I also then the first startup I worked in, I actually did a lot with earthquake risk around buildings. So I'm very familiar with the built environment and that kind of thing. That's a quick background of myself.
So, for context, to anyone who's listening here, there's a gradient. And as I mentioned earlier, I view myself as having more of the commoner peasant mind surrounding the built environment. I have never built a structure with my bare hands. I don't really know what goes into concrete besides gravel and something that makes it stick together. I don't know how tall you can stack buildings before you need to use steel. Uh, I don't know why they stopped using brick to build structures. There's these things I kind of notice, but
I
I
can
don't
tell you
really
that
know.
if you want.
We can get into that.
We
So
can get into it.
to go to my knowledge level classification of one being someone who doesn't know anything, two being someone who has just had tangential experiences or circumstantial experiences with the topic, three being someone who's done a lot of their own research, four being a professional, five being a world expert. I would put myself at a two. I've looked around at the built environment and been like, oh, I live in an environment built by humans, and I don't know anything about it. And I would place you at a four. I don't know if you think
Okay.
that's accurate, but I think it is.
I
There's
think
a
as
bit of a
strong as
gulf there.
a four. A four is a very a fair number. Yep.
So as long as everyone understands that I'm a commoner and you are an expert, this conversation can proceed. But I think a good way to get into this, if you would like, is for you to share your specific complaint about the built environment that you sent me a photo of.
Yeah, I would love to do that. So I'm going to share my screen very quickly. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what I have just shared with you fine people is a picture of downtown Grand Rapids. Now, if you will look closely, you will see that this is Division Avenue, one block up from Fulton. So this is literally the center of the city. Okay. This is where the northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest, like that is based on the intersection immediately behind us. So we are right in the heart of downtown. Also, for those people who have been around Grand Rapids over the last several years, you will also note that Division has been closed, literally closed, for at least a year and a half straight. And I believe it was almost 2 years that it was just closed, like completely tore up. I believe they were laying some kind of fiber optic cable. The fact that a serious city would allow you to do this for that long, shut down the main corridor right through the heart of the city, is asinine in a completely separate conversation. We're not going to get into that. But finally, just at the end of last winter, so we're kind of coming into the second summer now of this project being completed, it does look nice. The project looks great. All the intersections are kind of dialed in. They have all the fanciest, crosswalk things and all that jazz. But you will notice here in the foreground of this picture, right here, the infrastructure is less than a year old and it was already crumbling. It is literally already failing and it's only been done a year. Okay. And this is one specific example, but I have noticed other examples throughout the greater West Michigan area and also when I lived in California, where these contractors will come in, spend untold millions of dollars, causing significant disruptions to the flows of traffic, to people's daily commutes, to even just like the culture and kind of structure of communities. And then at the end, they don't even do a good job. Like the project is already falling apart or it doesn't work as it should. For example, there was a project at an old house I used to live in where they completely redid the drain on the side of the road. And quite literally, it would fill up with water every single day and just stagnate there because of sprinkler systems that would just dump water into the street. So I just want to just posit this as yet another example of kind of structural failure in your society where it's like, even when you do roll out the red carpet and you get a good contractor in there and you're like, we're going to rebuild this, we're going to make an investment in the future, there's still no accountability and no like serious recourse. Now, I don't know, maybe they have replaced this in the last couple of weeks since I took this picture. I highly doubt it. But it just speaks to this idea of like, they do this huge project, they make tons of money, they cause huge disruptions, and then there's no accountability to make sure it actually works long term.
Thank you for sharing that. This seems to me like what I assume a barber or a dentist walking around town sees that other people don't. You know, a barber just sees bad haircuts everywhere they go.
Yeah.
That maybe another person wouldn't notice. Or a dentist sees yellow teeth where other people would see normal teeth. Me, for example, this looks great. I've seen so many mangled roads and sidewalks. I'm like, oh, what's the big deal, right? Without the context of they just finished this and it shouldn't be breaking already. But
right,
to back up a little bit, this is like the definition of the tip of the iceberg. It's the very tippity tip, less than 1% of what we could discuss here. Because what you're telling me is not only is this seemingly superficial damage to new construction or failure of new construction, it's not only indicative of faults in how the work itself was done, but it's indicative of systemic problems in how all construction is done. It's indicative of systemic problems of how government is done. It just reaches deeper and deeper into more and more subsystems. Like a node modules package for those who are familiar with the reference, where it just keeps referencing more and more external libraries. For me, looking at this from the commoner's point of view, it's hard to see I'm curious if other people get as upset. They may be like, oh, this is new. Why is it, why is it kind of flaking up? But they may not have an intuition as to whether that is an unusual or a normal outcome. In Michigan, for example, you'll get potholes pretty fast, even after you pave over a road. So people's simple mental model of how often do we repair the roads? Annually is their
Why
answer.
doesn't that happen in other cold climates, though?
See, I have
like
no idea.
People specifically talk about this in Michigan, there's
people.
all sorts of different theories. But one of the main reasons is because we allow heavier loads on our roads than other states do. Presumably, and I don't know the history of this, but I was told that it was due to a lot of lobbying from the auto industry that allowed them to carry heavier truckloads, basically. And when you have heavier truckloads, they deteriorate the roads quicker. There's also, questions of should you be using concrete or asphalt, and what's the actual better, kind of mix for these roads. It gets extremely complicated because there's like AASHTO, American Association of Highway Transportation Office or something like that, that does a lot of standards that roads need to follow. But then they also don't necessarily account for the local conditions that maybe the local engineers have a little more intuition about. There's a number of issues. There's also a huge problem with public works projects where they public bid the project and then someone will win the contract based on the lowest bid, and then they just change order the project many times, and they end up costing a lot more than a proper bid with actually the complete scope of the project in the original bid. That person never wins the bid, right? And this is where you kind of get into these, they're not conspiracies, but they're just like the way the industry works. The profit's made in change orders, not in the original bid.
They're like corruption standard operating procedures.
It's not, it's corruption in the way that like that's not the way you would ideally be doing it, but like it's not corruption in the way of like there's backroom deals. I'm sure there's that too, but I'm just saying a lot of this is coming out due to the structure of a lot of these like bids. There was a huge project in California a number of years ago to remove the east span of the Bay Bridge, which was a massive like trestle bridge basically. And the bid called for the complete removal of the bridge, which anyone who understands how a bridge works is like, wow, that's insane. They removed the foundations of the pier, which are probably located, I don't know, 40, 50, 100 feet below the surface of the bottom of the bay, way embedded into the subterranean surface of the floor of the bay. And you're like, wow, that's crazy. Well, the company that won the bid was like, actually, like it's a lot harder to remove this bridge than we thought. Like we were wondering if we could just leave those in there, and it's going to save like $400 million. And it's kind of like, no, you won the bid with those being removed. Another company didn't win that bid because they bid it ethically and properly to remove those things. That's why their bid was higher. And now you guys can't afford to remove them, so you're asking for more money. Like it's not illegal what they're doing. It's highly unethical, but a lot of projects end up happening like this.
So, who, first question, is this just a United States problem, or is this a problem with construction projects everywhere in the world that you know of?
So, yeah, so in my experience, my direct experience working has been limited to the United States in terms of actual building things. But this is definitely a problem. I mean, there's much bigger corruption in a lot of other countries. For example, Haiti, if you remember in 2011, there was an extremely destructive earthquake there. I mean, who even knows how many people perished in that earthquake, right? A big reason was because even though a lot of the buildings were quote unquote designed properly, the contractors didn't include enough reinforcement steel. So due to corruption, so the buildings fell down. And that's the way a lot of people are killed in so-called developing economies and earthquakes, because the buildings collapse on them. Ironically, a lot of them actually die after the earthquake because they're trying to like go back into buildings that are unstable, or they die due to humanitarian conditions, like they get cholera or something like that after a major earthquake. So often the number of people that die aren't even due to the structural issues of building collapse. A huge number of people die from electrocution and fire after earthquakes as well, because gas lines get broken and electricity utilities get broken. Yeah. So it's not like this is an American problem per se. Like corruption is a problem everywhere. That's why we're supposed to have building codes to have people kind of come through and take this, kind of through. But, and I haven't looked into this in terms of finding examples, but you just look at that and it's like somebody had to sign off on that at the city level. And there should be some accountability if it falls apart within a year, in my opinion, that the contractor should be held liable for that.
Yeah. So in the current regime, I guess, in the current paradigm, who does that authority rest with? Would it just need to be the people that on the government would need to say there's some kind of breach of contract?
Yeah. I mean, that's what would have to happen. Now, there's different parts of government that build different parts of the road, right? Like the city is responsible for certain roads. The county road commission is responsible for certain roads. The Department of Transportation at the state is responsible for certain roads. There's also certain like so-called specialty districts that pop up sometimes. So, for example, in the Bay Area, all the bridges are actually run, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's run by a special like bridge district. So all the bridges are owned by this like subsidiary that actually runs those bridges. But typically major bridges are run by the state transportation department. Yeah.
From the commoner's point of view, how much does the commoner actually need to know about this stuff?
Honestly, probably not that much. It's part of, what actually comes to my mind is this World Economic Forum thing called the Economic Competitive Index, which everyone's worried about the Economic Forum now because of all this boogie conspiracy theories and all that kind of thing. But at their root, they have still some pretty solid reporting and some pretty solid like reports that they do. One of them is this idea of the Economic Competitive Index, and one of the base kind of parts, it's almost like a triangle when you talk about your economy. And the base parts are things like, do you have access to like roads? Do you have access to consistent power? Do you have access maybe above that to like manufacturing facilities? Like, are there people who can do welding? Are there machine shops, right? Maybe above that, there's kind of more advanced machining things like, robot welding and all these different kinds of things, right? And so the idea is, just to think about it intuitively, it's very hard to do, cutting edge brain surgery research if you're worried about the electricity cutting off in the middle of the day, right? That's to try to give you the intuition behind this. So why the average person should care about this is because this is the base of the pyramid, right? So when these things start to fall, then the top parts of the pyramid can't support themselves, right? It's like if people are stuck in traffic, they get less done, right? So another great example of a similar type of failure, and many people will not believe me on this. They'll say there's just no way that this is possibly true. But many municipalities that control these types of roads are now intentionally trying to add congestion in because it will disincentivize people from driving. I'm telling you, there's a number of municipalities in California that have literally done this, and it has been their completely clear objective for doing this. I knew people in my PhDs whose whole research work was around this, the so-called road diet. There was an example here in Grand Rapids where they did a big project, huge project, where the interchange of 96 and 196. And, the project took 2 years. I don't even know how many. It was probably $150 million project. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars, like multiple new bridges, huge interchange in an interstate. And predictably, every single day, within some minor variation, there are backups at exactly these two places, depending on which way the traffic is going. In the morning, it happens in this one area, and on the afternoon, it happens in another area. There's another area in the Bay Area, Interstate 80, getting onto the Bay Bridge, where you can predictably predict these, like reliably predict traffic backups. Now, in my opinion, the people who were responsible and designed that, and then had that as a result immediately after it was opened, they should be fired and held accountable to the highest level possible. Like, you are making generational level investments here, and you can't even get the traffic patterns right. Someone needs to be held accountable. At the very least, you should lose your licenses. You should make zero money on the project. Like, any of the companies that made money on this should lose money. And then there becomes this thing, well, we just built it, we didn't design it. And, so there becomes this whole thing. But ultimately, it's like, this is a total and utter failure. How much time have you cost society over the last 3 to 4 years that this project has been open when we could predictably say that this was going to cause a traffic backup? And it begs the question, did they do this intentionally?
That's what I was just going to ask is,
Yeah.
Can you discern negligence from intentional, like you were saying, maybe there was a car diet zealot in there somewhere in the planning process, or maybe there's some way that they made money from it coming out worse, from having a bad outcome. But it sounds like from what you're saying that there isn't a clear way to discern that in most cases.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think if you actually did some kind of investigation, but the problem is reasonable doubt is hard, man, because it's easy to like throw up a reasonable doubt. You know, how do you know the actual heart of someone when they're making these decisions? Uh, I have a friend, Dr. Strangelove is his name, off the famed Stanley Kubrick movie character of Dr. Strangelove, How I Learned to Love the Bomb. Maybe he'll come on the show sometimes, but he has a quote that I love where he says, "Never confuse malevolence with sheer incompetence." And he told me that because he was a soldier and he learned in Afghanistan, like these commanders of his were making what from his perspective were completely insane decisions that were resulting in Americans getting killed. And he's like, this is crazy. Like, you guys are coming into this point. And it's like, but wait a second. He's like, it makes no sense for these guys to want to have American soldiers get killed. And it actually is bad for them to have American soldiers get killed. Like, it's bad for their careers, it's bad for everything. So it must just be incompetence. It must be a lack of information, incompetence. These things, it's difficult to tell the difference there. But I genuinely wonder, it's like, how many of these people that are in West Michigan have actually had the experience of designing a major highway interchange?
Well,
Maybe none.
to use a kind of a simple mental model, you've talked about if you talk about the supply side and the demand side, and in this example, the supply side of the equation is the people creating the infrastructure, and the demand side are the people using the infrastructure. It, in a typical market, you have there's this sense that the consumers of a good will demand certain things from the supplier. Obviously, this is very different from a market for something like shampoo, where if the shampoo burns your scalp, they'll be like, "Well, we aren't going to use it because it leaves burns on my head."
Sure.
What I'm trying to say here is, you mentioned this base of the pyramid of the economic development index:
Yeah.
power, water, telecommunications. I don't even know if I assume that's at the base of the pyramid.
It might be in step two.
Most
Yeah,
people,
but
myself included, really have no idea how this works. You flip the light switch and the electricity comes on. I don't even know where the wires are in my wall. I wouldn't have the slightest idea of how to explain that to someone else. And I think most people are in the same boat. Do the common
yeah.
people have like a responsibility to learn about the base of the pyramid, if you will, so that they can vent more targeted anger on bad roads or inefficient, lack of electricity? Not that we don't lack electricity. I'm getting a little long-winded here, but let me back up and say one more thing. I
Yeah.
think in the U.S., maybe compared to other countries, and I've had the fortune of knowing quite a few people from Africa, they
Yes.
have electricity in Africa, but especially like in South Africa, for example, they also have load shedding. So you can use your PlayStation and you can charge your phone and you can do everything you can do in the United States, but then for a few hours, you better have a water tank. So
Yeah.
it seems like a healthier mindset because they get to learn the base and the top of the pyramid, the whole stack very intimately. Whereas in the U.S., we have the luxury to abstract ourselves away because the base of the pyramid fails so infrequently. And the consequence of it, I guess, is that you may not be able to articulate why you should be upset with failures in your built environment.
You raise a very interesting question, Don, and I don't think there's a correct answer, period. But I guess what I would just say is let's just think about what knowing the various things actually entails. And I think we'll arrive at what I believe is the correct answer. So we have finite time every day, and we have finite days in our lives. And learning about various things takes time and energy, and there are concepts that are kind of foundational to understanding why certain things work that do not actually benefit most people or even many people given what they need to know for their jobs. So for example, if you are a doctor, right? Understanding like the nuances of the second law of thermodynamics and understanding why energy systems are built the way they are with like cooling towers, for example, at power plants, you only have so much time in your day. Do we want you thinking about that? Do we want you thinking about, hey, is the local utility making the right choices long term such that I will be able to have electricity at my hospital to do complex surgeries or procedures when I need them to be? We've talked about the ultrasound booth. Does the ultrasound tech need to be lobbying the local utility to make sure they have power when they need to do ultrasounds? Because I think that that's where you end up with. Now, maybe you could say there is a base level understanding that everyone should have in terms of like, hey, the grid is important. Hey, those power poles are how you get electricity to your house. Hey, while that power plant is unsightly, it also allows you to have your iPhone and it allows you to have an air conditioned home in the winter or in the summer and a heated home in the winter, like these different types of things. I think that that's very important, like understanding that the electricity doesn't just show up at the wall out of the blue, but understanding how these things work, I don't think is a good use of everyone's time. It's actually a division of labor, and that's actually a function of what should be a high trust society. We should trust that the utility is trying to bring a product to our house at a reasonable cost, understanding the long-term maintenance of their infrastructure and all these different types of things. Now, we've decided that we're going to give them legal monopolies, so then the state gets involved, and then you end up with all of these issues. There's a lot of kind of complications around power generation strategies in terms of climate change, whether climate change is that big of an issue or not. I'm not saying it's not real, but the magnitude of the issue is 100% debatable at this point. So it's a question of just like, well, what can people worry about? We only have so much time to worry in the day.
I want to push back on this because
Okay.
Before I push back on this, I do think that the experts in a field are most responsible for the outcomes in that field, right? So like you were saying, the people responsible for paying the people to build the roads and the people who build the roads themselves should bear the burden for their failure. You can't foist that responsibility onto the common people. However, nuclear energy. Let's look at a place like Germany. The common people very much applied pressure to the government, to the best of my understanding. And this is anecdotal. For example, I was riding a train in Germany a few years ago, and I sat next to an older man who was an engineer his whole life. And we were talking about energy, and I was like, why did you guys get rid of all your nuclear reactors? And he just got these wide eyes, and he's like, you were not here for Chernobyl. He's like, we had to kill all of the livestock in the whole country. The final livestock solution, because they were irradiated. They had to be killed. And I was just like, oh my God, dude, all the livestock? He's like, every chicken and cow. And he was so horrified by that. He was like, so that's why we can't have nuclear power. Clearly, there's this groundswell.
That's not at all the history of the anti-nuclear movement in Germany, but that's fine.
That's why I said it was anecdotal.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm like,
I'm
not
sure
at all
it goes deeper than that. My impression.
No,
from
it's
this
much
guy
shallower than that. It's much shallower than that. I can give you a 10,000-foot view, but you keep going. I don't want to interrupt you.
I was just going to say my impression was about, Germany's famous nuclear debacle, which is, them thinking they could rely on Russia for all the energy they needed for their factories, destroying their nuclear factories, and then Nord Stream gets blown up, and they're like, My understanding for that was something along the lines of all these German people had to kill all of their livestock, and it was so traumatizing that they thought, we're going to be the first and most moral country to get rid of all nuclear energy. A grassroots pressure. Like what I was just describing earlier, where, the people shouldn't have to be responsible, it should be the experts. Here, the people seem to take responsibility and overthrow the
Yeah.
government. This is based on my very simple and mostly anecdotal experience riding a train in Germany and talking to an old guy talking about killing all of the livestock in
Yeah.
the country.
So, can I tell you my understanding
Yes,
of what
please.
happened? I believe Germany had something like 22, somewhere in that nature, nuclear reactors in the year 2010. Okay. They had one of the greenest electrical footprints in all of Europe and actually the entire world in terms of like CO2, in terms of air quality, and that kind of thing. Very much only, I think, outpaced by France. Okay. In 2011, there was a massive earthquake in Japan. Okay. And the Fukushima Daiichi, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that, nuclear facility in Japan got hit by a tsunami. There was a whole bunch of kind of cascading events after that because their generators got knocked out. So it ended up causing basically a nuclear accident at that facility in 2011. Okay. They're like still cleaning up that issue today, 15 years later. Okay. I remember I had a very good friend who worked in the nuclear power plant service industry at that time doing this kind of work around servicing nuclear power plants. And he said that the shortest competitive bid that he saw from any corporation in the world who was qualified to do this was a 25-year plan to clean up that earthquake, that nuclear reactor. Okay. That was the backdrop to a so-called organic movement in many countries in Europe to denuclearize. But if you actually, and this is where it gets conspiratorial, but if you actually kind of peel behind the curtain of these things, they were all funded by so-called Russian NGOs. And it was all an astroturf kind of movement in order to demonize nuclear power within Germany, making Germany more reliant on Russian gas, which at that time was this very, very in vogue alternative to coal, basically. Nonetheless, that natural gas is still a carbon fossil fuel. So that was kind of the backdrop on that. Fast forward, the Ukraine war made it very unpalatable for Russia to buy, or Germans to buy Russian gas, coupled with the Nord Stream gas pipeline being blown up. Now Germany has like the dirtiest electricity in Europe. So that would actually be an example of, I believe, quite the opposite of what you were positing. It was a completely uneducated people who have no understanding of real energy, who have no understanding of trade-offs, who were basically like, we want to start burning brown coal again. Let's do that. Those giant wheel bucket things that you see and they look like they're out of a Star Wars movie, those are all like Russian brown coal mining equipment. So, that's kind of what I meant when I was like, you need to have a cursory understanding that nuclear power infrastructure, electricity is important. But you just can't be an expert in everything, man.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, it's hard to split up or disambiguate. I don't even know if that's the right word. It's hard to determine what the common person should be responsible for and what they shouldn't. But
Well, no, I was just gonna pivot slightly in the sense of yes. So in kind of Western liberal democracies, we have people that we elect, right? Or those people appoint, the elected people appoint to try to make these decisions for us. And in theory, the ballot box is supposed to be an accountability measure. Now, right now, we have a man sitting in the White House who is extremely controversial, Donald Trump, President Donald Trump. And some of the stuff he does is so off the chain that people are just deeply upset, all this, that, and the other, starting wars. Who knows? I'm not even going to comment on that. But every once in a while, he does something that is just a head scratcher, and you're just kind of like, I didn't realize we were going to do this. One of these is coming up. I want to get your thoughts on this. June 14th, 2026, he is hosting a UFC fight at the White House. And I guess I would just pose this question to you, Don. is this a good thing? Like, is this like going to rally the troops of not literal troops, but like rally the American spirit? Is this a bad thing? I'm sure Donald Trump's getting a cut. I would bet a lot of money on that. Or is this just like a nothing burger that is a distraction from wars in the Middle East, from out of control inflation and spending, from a broken social contract? I want to posit that question to you.
Okay. Let me give not the full Putin answer where he needs to go into, the 1200 years of Russian history. But a little bit of a backdrop. I, Don Daguerre, am employed by Memetic Review, the publication, and in public appearances, I am required to conform to the Memetic Review editorial policy, which has some explicit guidelines for political commentary.
Oh, it does.
Not explicit. Okay,
I've reviewed it, but I need a refresher.
You've seen it here. Memetic Review supports America and believes in the success of America. Memetic Review, since they fled the UK after losing the Corn Laws debate, settled in the United States, made it their home, and has since supported all subsequent U.S. administrations just because they want to see America succeed. So what I'm about to say...
That's a noble position.
Yes, Memetic Review, the publication, would like to see America succeed. I have some personal feelings. I'm going to try to stick with the publication's view here first. In the opinion of the publication, anything that benefits the United States is we are willing to evaluate. We err on the side of go for it. If this is good for America, if this brings people together, if this creates pride in our nation, if this makes America, the United States of America, seem stronger and more magnanimous on the global scale, the publication supports this UFC fight on the front lawn of the White House. However, the publication also acknowledges that there could be serious externalities to having a UFC fight. Even if there are good outcomes, there could be bad outcomes, concurrent with it. Aside from a lot of this legalese, let me give you my personal take. I think it reminds me of Idiocracy, which is maybe the worst indictment of the whole thing. Have you ever seen the
Luke Wilson movie?
Yeah, the documentary Idiocracy. Have you ever seen this movie?
Documentary. I have.
The horror documentary Idiocracy. It reminds me of that. You really don't need to say more than that. If you look at, because Idiocracy takes place, I think like the last half of the movie most of the last half of the movie, they're in the White House. This is a political drama.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It is a political drama like The West Wing. They are in the hot seat making decisions. And unfortunately for the present day, the Idiocracy was supposed to take place in the year 2500, I think. To feel like that timeline is just so much accelerated is really, really frightens me. And to get even more specific, a lot of people, my understanding of the Idiocracy criticism, when it felt very real, was when Hulk Hogan came in front of Congress. This ripped muscle guy. I mean, in Idiocracy specifically, their gag, the thing that they thought was so funny, was to take Terry Crews. I don't think he has sleeves on. I believe he's in some sort of sleeveless Uncle Sam red, white, and blue onesie or something, shooting a gun in Congress. It was so close to that. Everyone, I think, became very fearful. Maybe not everyone, but people who had seen the movie and were paying attention. I'm very concerned that this event could cause a similar rupture in the faith of the public in our institutions of government, right? because looks matter, appearances matter. You think they don't,
They matter a ton.
but they matter a lot. And to be honest, a lot of international relations is kind of just flexing and appearances. This is most evident in the military aspect. Most countries spend very little of their time fighting an actual war. They spend most of their time threatening to fight a war. And in fact, those are actually two very different things. But to threaten effectively, it's about looks and perception. There's similar things in negotiation, trade agreements, like your perception of your government, of your leadership. I mean, it's very, very important. Going back to how this could be good, maybe it would ingratiate the government with the more, I don't want to say like common elements of the population, but they're not playing polo on the lawn.
It's a common man sport.
Yeah, they're not doing like a douchey Ivy League recreational activity. This is supposed to be like every American is supposed to enjoy this. But it is also, UFC is very, how do I say this? It's coded in a certain way where it's like maybe you do want to preserve. It may degrade the appearance of your civic, your institutions, right? Like the White House is a symbol. The symbol is very important, and even very small mutations to a symbol can have large downstream effects on the population.
That's 100% where my opinion is right there. It's just unbecoming to host a fist fight on the front lawn of the arguably most important building in the country. I mean, certainly top 5, right? I mean, I think it's unbecoming of the building. I think it's unbecoming of the history. I think it's unbecoming of just what Americans value as entertainment. Like, I think it's barbaric. I have seen a handful of UFC matches. I've even been to kind of fights in person, not in this country. I'd never been to a UFC thing, but I went to a Muay Thai event, and I did not appreciate people beating each other up. It was not entertaining for me. It actually upset me a lot. So much so that like I kind of refuse to watch those things. It's just I understand it's sport. I get all that. I mean, I'm even envious of the skills. Like, I wish I knew how to fight. I'm not really a fighter. I think we've talked briefly on the program before about, the very limited fights that we've been in. And thankfully, I mean, it's just extremely disconcerting. Maybe it's almost like a scapegoat kind of thing. Like the violence of football, for example, is a way to kind of project interstate rivalries or inter-group rivalries into these teams, and they kind of duke it out in this like not zero risk, but not high risk environment. Yeah.
So this is actually where maybe I would enthusiastically endorse this event. And the publication does not support what I'm about to say. Let's say you have one person who's like who's the guy they kidnapped from Venezuela?
Mubarak.
No, Mubarak's from Egypt. The guy they kidnapped from Venezuela, the leader of Venezuela.
You're totally right. You're totally right.
Why can't I remember his name? He's in jail with Diddy, and he's in Arkham Asylum, basically in New York, with all of the other supervillains. I can't remember his name. Anyways, it is very embarrassing. Yeah, the ex-leader of Venezuela. If someone who looked like him and was supposed to represent him, even if they were just wearing like Venezuela shorts, or even if they brought out the guy himself. Maduro. They bring out Maduro,
Mubarak, definitely,
and have him fight like some American hero, like it's literally Sylvester Stallone. I'd be like, okay, this is a little more, you're mythologically defeating. We'll have Sylvester Stallone fight him, and then to have another American hero fight someone wearing like Iran flag pants, and then we can even have them go and fight whoever they want, right? Like if they did a little bit of that, maybe I personally would be interested. The publication does not endorse this.
By no means.
Yeah. I have a question for
I
you. Or
yeah.
say what you were going to say first. You sounded like
No,
you had
no.
a thought.
I'd rather have a question. I was going to respond and riff off that, but yeah.
My question is, do you think that it would be why do you think they picked UFC? I was thinking about this while you were talking about how you thought the sport itself was barbaric, and I haven't really watched any UFC at all. I've seen clips on in a
Yeah.
sports bar. I'm at Buffalo Wild Wings. There's 800 TVs.
Right.
You see clips of a few
Right.
punches for 10 seconds, and that's it. I've never sat down and watched one of these things.
Yeah.
Why did they pick a UFC fight when they could have had a basketball game or a they probably don't have enough space to play football. And maybe there's a space constraint, but
I don't know.
seems like there was a deeper choice there. Why do you think that was done?
So if I were to speculate, I know that President Trump is a big fan of UFC. I know that he goes to them. And I know that just because of news articles and different reports that I've heard, that very frequently he goes to these things. And when he walks in, the crowd goes nuts. They go absolutely nuts. I think he has a very deep history with the founder, Dana White. So I think that would probably be the actual impetus for this. I do not know. That might even be well established, but I mean, it is objectively a very popular thing. So it's not like, again, it's not like they picked, women's field hockey or something like that, right? I mean, this is a mainstream event.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine that's it. There may be some kind of kickback involved for the president himself or his family or some kind of event staff curating or something like that. I mean, that's kind of always just to try to play that side of the angle. But I would think it's probably a little more plainly just he's a fan and he
That makes sense.
goes to the events.
Sometimes, what is it? Occam's razor? Like the most simple explanation is the most likely?
Dude, I get it. Like, where do these things normally happen? New York City, Las Vegas, like, and you're like, oh, I could have this like out in front of my house. It'd be this huge event. There's no doubt, the president loves a party. There's no doubt he loves attention. What's just another excuse to have a bunch of folks that are important who are going to go to these things anyway, go out and kowtow at the White House?
Yeah, fair
I think
enough.
it's that simple. I really like your explanation, though, or the idea around it as it is kind of this like rallying cry and kind of it's almost just like it gives purpose in some way for people. And I think that is incredibly important. And we need more unification in this country. And I know that there's a lot of people who don't like Trump that do enjoy this sport. And so I think that that's a very good thing. Sport is supposed to be a unifier amongst people. Even when you look at something like the Olympics, right? I mean, it was a big part of the Olympics. Obviously, it hasn't resulted in this. We've had many global conflicts since the Olympics in the modern era have been executed. But the idea is it's supposed to be this unification of nations.
Yeah, you definitely see that with American football, where it brings the town together at the high school level. It will bring communities of all different sizes together at the college level, and then whole metro areas or multi-state regions together at the NFL level. And
Crazy.
The American flag is always very prominent at those events. Military personnel are always brought out at the beginning. If it's a big game, they get a flyover. It's
right.
It's very. I view American football as integral to America's civic religion. And if you think about it, a lot of American football games are in some way publicly funded. Most of them are public high schools, right? The most
public
football
high
games
schools,
that happens are public high schools, which is tax
by
dollars.
the sheer number of games, yes. And also just a lot of them are at big public universities. Big state schools are notorious for big football games. Even on a more of a corrupt side of this whole thing, many of these even NFL stadiums are funded in large part by public dollars.
I did not know that.
Oh, dude.
Oh, do we want to get into it? You just can't get into it.
I do not know all the details on this, but there's a lot of controversy around this across many municipalities because these are billion-dollar organizations, and they're getting their houses basically paid for by tax dollars in many circumstances. Yeah, just straight up.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I guess if you flip, I was trying to make American football sound like, this honorable, virtuous civic religion ritual that we all do. But now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, okay, have you ever seen Friday Night Lights? The
I have
movie?
not, but I know what it's about, but I have not. No,
I haven't read the book. I haven't seen the TV show, but I have seen the movie from the early 2000s where Billy Bob Thornton, I believe, is the coach. And at one point, the premise, are you familiar with the premise?
Isn't Denzel Washington in it? Or am I totally misremembering?
No, you may be thinking
totally.
of Remember the Titans, the civil rights era
movie.
football movie produced by Disney, I think.
Never mind that.
Where
Sorry,
he's the coach.
totally different movie.
But
Never
no,
mind.
this is important.
I think they came
right?
out in the same era, though.
American football is incredibly important to the United States politically. Like it is part of our civic religion, and the Friday Night Lights. So my point. I was trying to be like American football, this beautiful tradition that unites us. In that movie, there's this scene where they lose a really important game, and all of the parents of the fathers of the current Permian Panthers, this West Texas football team, had all won a state championship at the 80s. And the team was pretty good. And they were under enormous pressure to win another state championship. They lose an important game, and Billy Bob Thornton has to drive to like a Texas Roadhouse or something to do like a coin flip to see who gets into the high school football playoffs. I'm pretty sure this is the part of the movie where it happens. And he's listening to the radio. People have left signs in his yard like,
right,
"You're not going to be here long, coach," stuff like that.
Yeah.
He's listening on the radio, and this guy says, "If you ask me, I think they're doing too much school in the school and not enough football." Totally unironically. And when you hear it in the movie, like in the context of the scene, you're like, this is true. This has been said and unironically thought before. You take it to the college level, and there's this next level of absurdity where a lot of the Division I colleges basically ran professional sports teams without really paying their athletes for decades. Why are these? Go ahead.
I was just going to comment on that. I mean, I don't want to interrupt you mid-thought, but this is one of the most notable examples in my adult life where I have completely 180'd my position on the whole thing, and that is NCAA football player compensation. When I was in the university, I was very against it. As I got a little older and started to understand what was actually going on, I think it's extremely exploitive of the way that the universities run. And I have a number of thoughts on this issue, but I completely changed my opinion. Yeah.
I tutored a lot of the athletes, especially on the football team at Michigan.
Right.
And they were under enormous pressure. Their schedule did not allow them to be a student. Like, in my opinion, they made all the arrangements they could, but the student athlete thing was at best a strain, and at worst like a total fiction. Because if you're good enough,
it's a legal term in order to justify that exploitation.
Yeah, in football, it's the worst because the injuries are most egregious. So you can have one bad injury and your career is over. Well, suddenly you don't have any money that you can take with you to help you jumpstart your life from competing in this ultra competitive, super high status, super time consuming, super high pressure endeavor. You can come out kind of empty handed. Some of those people tried to undertake more rigorous courses of study. Maybe I'm sure there's so many people that would come out of the woodwork and disagree with me. And this isn't a sports radio show. I wish it was, because those guys, this is a huge deviation. That's an art form that I don't even understand. It's unique in its own way. Anyways,
Sure.
I agree with you. I have one final thing to say about American football, though, and I think this
Okay.
is underconsidered. I think the publication does not endorse this. This is totally my own personal take. The publication would actually rebuke what I'm about to say. Maybe they would. I would need to run it by the editor in chief. They're a beast. They would shred me. But I think that American football is actually subconsciously, people don't realize that they're doing this. They are making offerings to the Mesoamerican gods, specifically Quetzalcoatl, and the great sacrifice is actually what makes our empire so powerful. The empire grounded in the North American continent. And if the Mesoamerican gods were not sacrificed to, it would all fall apart. And you could make an argument that kind of our downturn could be due to insufficient sacrifices to Quetzalcoatl. They should honestly try to go and just sacrifice some cows on the infield at halftime and see what happens. I think this seems totally reasonable to me, but
I want to ask you, are you being serious right now? Because if you are, I will respond, but I'm not sure.
I understand why you would think this is not serious. It sounds ridiculous. Yes. Okay. However,
I have heard crazier things, and I have taken them very seriously. I'm taking you serious at this. I do not think this is completely off the chain. I do not think so. I think it's 80% off the chain, but that is not even close to being off the chain.
A lot of football is very much civic religion, way more than basketball or baseball. A day at the ball game, or like football has this worship element to it that I have no way to scientifically define, but anyone who's really been there kind of understands what I'm saying. What are we worshiping? Well, the Mayans would play this ball game where the losing team would get sacrificed, right? Not always, but that was a thing that they did, and it was to make the gods happy. And they had an empire when the gods were happy. I'm not saying that there's a causal relationship between making sacrifices and the gods being happy. I'm just saying that it's possible, and we have maybe accidentally, maybe intentionally. Look, America's rise to global power didn't happen until we started playing American football and worshiping the gods of war and corn, which I think were the gods, the Mesoamerican. This is very reductive, right? But the Mesoamerican gods, they love corn, which goes into all of the stuff that gets sacrificed on college game day, right? Your corn-fed beef, sacrifice, corn, just corn and everything. They love corn, and they love, we can't kill anyone, but we can give them traumatic brain injuries and break their leg and spend lots and lots of money. And I think it makes them happy enough where they're like, okay, you know what? You can use North America as the base for your giant globe-spanning empire, and let's see where it goes. That's my personal opinion, and the publication completely rejects this take, and will probably fire me.
I mean, I'm with you on the 80% off the chain on that one. I think 80% off the chain, 20% on the chain is about the right take on that. But I will respond to a few things because I think it is very interesting. I completely agree to this sentiment of there are deeper forces out there maybe than we are willing to admit. Now, that could be like a spiritual element, like we've talked about dualism here before on the show, or it could be as simple as a Carl Jung collective unconscious, Quetzalcoatl collective element, right? Where if enough people in the society are engaging this part of our very low level common ancestry, right, there could be something there. So if enough people are kind of activating that part of our brains, that allows this kind of societal layer to kind of permeate throughout, and we all kind of rise on that layer, like kind of the sea of the subconscious, if you will, right? So I think there could be a lot of validity to that. Now, do I believe that Quetzalcoatl is a deity in the traditional sense? I'm not quite there yet. I'm not sure that is the case, but I think what do these gods represent? If you actually look at a lot of the kind of classic Greek and Roman gods that maybe we're more familiar with in the West, or even like a bunch of the Hindu deities, or even or even many of the Roman Catholic saints, right? They represent these different like elements in life that we know are important for thriving, or we know are important for prosperity. So I think it totally makes sense that if you're not paying homage to those kind of bases of the pyramid, or these kind of gods, if you will, you start to reap the you reap what you sow in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, football, American football is just worship of America. And so many of the
Hmm.
traits that we take that we value. You worship America by spending enormous amounts of money, celebrating the military, entertaining yourself, and just watching huge dudes pummel each other in
Yeah.
a Coliseum-esque setting. I
Right.
think importantly, also, I believe that American football is an American martial art that imitates
Hmm.
combined arms warfare. Uh, I
Hmm.
that can be contested. That's just a hot take on my part. The publication may or may not agree with me. I'll have to talk to the editor in chief.
I think, well, dude, I think it's interesting though, because you actually is American football a stand-in for like federalism, in the sense of we have these kind of federated states, right? Like, in Michigan, we have Michigan State, right? And our guys go to war with the Buckeyes of Ohio State, right? And, you've got the Illini and Illinois and all these different states around here. And it's almost like a stand in for conflict between the states. And it kind of is able to like release this tension in many ways, where if we didn't have this kind of collective, I don't know if sacrifice is the right word. Maybe it is, but if we didn't have this like collective venue to kind of all come together and duke it out figuratively, who knows? I mean, Civil War 2.0. Were there like nationwide sports teams before the Civil War? Was that not a thing?
No,
I know
not
baseball
that I
started
know of.
after that.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I
American
think we're looking
sports,
at
football was not popular.
1880s maybe. Well,
Football,
football is a later comer than like basketball, or I'm thinking baseball. I'm sorry.
I think the most popular sports were, I mean, definitely baseball. I don't know. I don't think people were really. I'm not an expert in this by any means,
No,
but from the
right.
very little I know, I think baseball started gaining popularity in the Civil War because the soldiers would play it together in camps
Mm,
and stuff. Excuse me.
yeah.
And then I believe boxing was just the most popular sport. To take this full circle, I think boxing was just the most popular sport until maybe baseball briefly surpassed it, and then American football took over at the latter half of the 20th century. I think largely
Baseball
because,
is still not a lightweight, man. I mean, the MLB is still a huge force in the sporting world.
yeah, but I just don't think they worship the ancient gods as well.
I see. So
It's still a serious venture, but they just
yeah,
don't do the it's not enough. It's not enough. But
totally different
maybe a
element.
UFC fight, right? Maybe what Donald Trump and the Trump administration, whoever organized this, maybe what they learned is they just know they're like they want something more. Like they're not satisfied. Like they want actual blood. And this has been tried before, right? The Romans had very gruesome gladiatorial games, which were both
Right.
entertainment and civic religion, like glorifying the state. But I think they also tried to glorify the Roman gods as well, which were very intertwined with the state. Maybe they're like, maybe someone in the administration was like, we have to just try this, and they just really want to make the Mesoamerican gods happy so that they'll allow us to continue basing our global empire out of North America. And bare knuckle fighting is the way, because football
Oh,
is
yeah.
it's not enough anymore.
Quetzalcoatl would definitely appreciate a good bare knuckle brawl between two dudes that are highly athletic, peak athletic prowess. My limited understanding of him from my reading of early North American history is somewhat of a. I don't think he's actually well understood, but isn't he like a god that like came over the sea and was like a war god of some type and brought like resources to a lot of these ancient civilizations? That's the like legend of Quetzalcoatl.
Yeah, I don't know if it was him or another one. There's the famous story of Cortez being mistaken for one of these gods.
Right.
Have no authority to talk to that in detail, so I actually
Fair enough.
decline to answer your question. Maybe, maybe. Are they going to allow any? Or is it just guys at this fight, or is it like a men and women UFC fight that you know of?
Or like the card, does it have women on it? I don't know. I'll be very honest with you. That really upsets me. I do not appreciate watching women beat each other up. It upsets me even more than the men. I think it's just unbecoming for women to fight. You can call me a sexist. I really don't. I don't care about that. I think I'm pretty comfortable with my view. I don't like it. I don't like fighting in general. I don't appreciate it.
Roosters? No, those don't look good.
Cockfighting?
Are they doing that at the? Is it just humans? Or are they doing dogs or roosters? Crickets? I heard crickets gets wild.
Dude, I will tell you right now, you mentioned dogfighting, man, you're going to get us cut off the channels, dude. That is like, many people are way off on that. I mean, who is that?
I do not support
football players.
Do not support dogfighting, and I actually will donate to PETA right now. I'm sorry.
No, I think Michael Vick, wasn't that the guy who was the dog fighter? Yeah, he was an NFL guy, and then he got mixed up in some dogfighting ring, and it's not even clear what he was responsible for or not. But no, dogfighting is brutal and grotesque. And I'm not a dog person. I'm not a dog hater, but I'm not a dog lover. I'm just a person that's kind of meh on dogs. I don't love them. I don't hate them. But it's completely insane to have dogs fight like that. I think it's grotesque and barbaric, and I don't understand it. I'm a guy that likes to read books. I don't want to be entertained that way.
People who criticize UFC, I've heard it criticized as human dogfighting.
But I mean, these guys have free will. I mean, you're not like locking a dog in there with another dog. And I think most dog fights are to the death, I believe. I believe most of them. I think, dude, often both dogs die.
Yeah. I know almost nothing about it. Weirdly enough, the only animal fighting, which I do not endorse any animal fighting, and neither does the publication, is cricket fighting, which I know very little about, but I knew a guy who told me a story about China and gambling in China, which is illegal, wink, wink. But
I didn't know that.
He said in China, if you don't want to be involved in society, for some reason, the dropouts of society become much more. I forget how he described it. There's something about Chinese culture in the 21st century that he was trying to describe to me that means that the dropouts and the burnouts end up doing some pretty strange and bizarre things. As in, there's not a typical like, well, I'm just going to smoke weed and do nothing. You get into some pretty niche subcultures, like this guy that he knew who was an expert in cricket fighting. And he would go into rural China and sneak into people's farms at night with a flashlight and look for the strongest crickets. And
wow,
he would make a ton of money because he would come back from like Jiangsu province with like the big cricket. I don't know how to say big cricket in Chinese, but I know there's
dollar bill size
there's a way
cricket.
to say it. Yeah, just I don't even know if that's what a cricket does.
Does something like that.
Yeah, and he would this guy that I was talking to, he was trying to bring him to cricket fights for gambling, and he ultimately was like, listen, I can't get too deep into this, because people were starting to ask him how to go to the cricket fights. And he's like, if you're not an American and Chinese people are asking you how to go to the underground cricket fights, you know what? One
Yeah.
animal activity that I hope is not abusive, because I actually found it really entertaining, was turtle racing. Have you ever seen a turtle race?
No, no, I've never even heard of such a thing in a serious way. I feel like that's like something you would see, honestly, man, on like Barney or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
What they would do is,
I can't tell if you're being serious or not.
no, I went to it in college. I went to a bar and they had a turtle race. It was like turtle race
You're
night.
joking me.
All you can
You're
drink
not
turtle
being
race
serious.
night. And what they
You're
would do is
joking.
they'd have a basket in the middle and a big table. Imagine like a big, like, I don't know, 8 or 10 foot diameter circular table with, from the edge of the table, there's a small margin in like an inner line on the table. So,
Yeah.
in the middle, everyone would crowd around the table, and everyone would get like a token with a different symbol on it.
Okay.
Boom, and then they take the basket off, and there's all these turtles in the middle, and they have little tokens on their backs. And the first turtle to cross the line, I mean, you win. And the turtles are just kind of like, they don't care. They're just like wandering around. Now in hindsight, this was over a decade ago. I think that probably was unethical, because the turtles probably didn't want to be racing. They probably just wanted to be in the creek eating little bugs. So,
I'm going to come to your defense on this one. I think in 2026, I think that's some pretty innocent fun, man. I think you're probably,
Okay.
I think that's probably all right, dude.
The publication
I-
does not endorse turtle racing.
no turtle racing. I think you're good on that. I mean, I'm sure someone would come up with some reason to get upset, but and I once famously in college, someone asked me to join their like rally against child soldiers, and I couldn't do another thing. There was too many things that I cared about at the time. We're all very young and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. And I looked over at this poor woman and I said, hey, that's a very noble cause, but I'm already riding like 6 freight trains to hell right now, and I just can barely keep those ones on the track. I can't add a 7th, so no, I can't come to your child soldier rally. And she looked at me like I was a completely insane person, but I maintained my sanity. I never had a nervous breakdown. I made it through. And that was because at some point you just got to call it. You know what I mean? Where do you actually draw the boundary of what's your thing to care about, what's your calling to care about, and what is just like, hey, I just can't worry about that. I can be against it, but I can't let this burn my time up. I don't know.
The publication does
For
not
me-
endorse child soldiers. But, no, not but.
Who does? No one's endorsing child soldiers. I'm just saying.
Have
That's
you ever
not,
seen
like,
Master and
I can't
Commander?
dedicate time to it.
Have you
I
ever seen
have.
the famous movie Master and Commander? It's a
have.
child soldier movie, basically. What, they take
I'm
these
not
like
sure I agree
what,
with
they
that.
take these
but
tweens, these British tweens, and put them
Yeah.
on these warships and make them go and fight the French. And he's all like, what, that 11-year-old
Oh.
is like, his arm was cut off, and he's like, I'm just like Nelson now, And it's child soldiers, man. But you never would have thought about it because they portrayed it so wholesome and Victorianly, the wholesome Victorian child soldier.
Yeah,
We do
I mean,
not
they also
endorse
would
child
like,
soldiers, even if it's an early 19th century British warship. We do not endorse
I was
child
going to
soldiers.
say the British Navy was known for like kidnapping dudes and just having them join the Navy. I can't remember the term for this, but that was definitely a
Impressment.
thing that the British Navy
Press
did.
gangs.
There's a term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Press gangs.
That was definitely a thing. So, I mean, who knows though. But at the same time, and I'm not defending this, but like maybe those guys were orphans and this was actually gave them a family structure. I mean, it's a perverted one, but like gives you purpose and this, that, and the other. And I've started to, as I get older, start to relook at some of these like historical decisions that people made like in history, like why would you go west, for example, in like the American expansionism era? Why would, if you were in China, go to California? Like why, if you were, I mean, there's numbers of examples like this, right? Of people doing these like big migrations or making certain decisions. And I think the reason that I have up until the last maybe several years been very like, wait, like, why would you do that? It's because I didn't understand, like, as compared to what? Like, what are we staying here for? And the idea of hope and the idea of a better future and the idea of adventure, like, those things I actually understand a lot. And so it's kind of makes a lot more sense, a lot of these decisions. So if you're like a street boy in London and you're barely getting through and there's like a sign up that's like get 3 meals a day, see the world, beat the French, like as like a 12-year-old boy, you might be like, actually, that sounds a lot better than what I'm doing here right now.
I think a
Living
lot of
on
the
the streets.
12-year-olds were junior officers that were children of the aristocracy, but that doesn't mean that they didn't they went to these miserable boarding schools, right? They probably, some of them never saw their parents. They were just
Yeah.
at these miserable boarding schools. And the trip to the Galapagos with maybe a little exciting cannon fire, why not? Why not?
I think we also, as you've pointed out, the level of violence, like outright violence, has decreased significantly in history that the average person is exposed to, at least in the West.
Well, this is an interesting, well, the level of real violence that people witness is probably decreased, but the level of simulacrum violence via media is massively increased.
Yeah, 1,000x.
Yeah, it's 10 billion x. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
you did have Romans, drawing gruesome, maybe like graffiti or whatever. But yeah, and you have to wonder what the net effect of that is. You may have never slaughtered your own animal or done anything like that, but you've watched some really gruesome television. And like what you were saying with the UFC and how it's just kind of gruesome and hard to watch, I feel that way about a lot of violent entertainment. A lot of people really like Quentin Tarantino. And his movies are just hard for me to watch because I keep thinking about what it would actually be like for that thing to actually happen. I can't take the extreme violence and put it into a pretend world. And I wonder, the people who can do that, what is the psychological effect there? I really have no idea. But briefly, to touch on a previous point that you had about people, there may have been more violence, but it may have only been in concert. Like, you may have seen a fist fight or two, but you didn't live through World War I until you went to the trenches, right? And I think a lot of people signed up for that because they were ignorant and they had no idea what it would actually be like, and they were bored, just bored, right? Like, even in the ancient era, I'm sure that you're slaughtering your own animals. You're probably seeing violent scenes occur pretty frequently, but you're never really in a pitched battle until you go and live through one. I'm sure that it was very hard to accurately describe to people what that was like. And they probably came back from it some of them being like, that was not good. I did kind of a moderate dive into this because I was curious about pre-industrial PTSD. Like,
that is a fascinating subject. I have wondered about this, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
This is not a well documented thing because modern psychiatry, which is how we understand this phenomenon, didn't exist until really the 20th century. And in World War I, they called it, by World War I, you're collecting population level statistics on all of the men that you push into your modern industrial military. So they were doing psych evals by World War I. They called it shell shock. And I don't know what they called it in World War II, but by Vietnam, they called it PTSD. But some of those symptoms,
I think they called it battle fatigue in World War II.
Okay. Yeah, they did have data on basically like psychological casualties, people that could no longer be in operations, and they observed interesting things like they'd be like someone could be fine until maybe like 5 continuous days of combat or 10 continuous days of combat, and then they don't work anymore.
Right.
There was this
Right.
speculation when I was reading into this that in classical antiquity or even like the Napoleonic era, most of these soldiers just spent their time marching around, and even like the American Civil War, and they would only fight a few pitched battles a year, or at all, right? And so the theory was that the prolonged exposure is what would cause the trauma and the PTSD. But there are
Yeah.
some accounts of going very far back to like the Greeks and the Romans at least, and I haven't investigated sources from China or India or other parts of the world, but accounts of PTSD like symptoms of veterans back then. So, long story short, my
Yeah.
point here is I
Well, I
think there may
wonder.
have always been this dynamic where violence is kind of glorified. And then when you actually experience it, you receive like this psychic mutilation that you just cannot recover from, period.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I think it matters a lot as to the idea of what your society is actually expecting of you. And and kind of the culture that you kind of come from and the culture that you basically kind of where you come from and where you're coming back to. So what I mean by that is if you're coming back to a culture that is celebrating you as a hero, I think the transition is easier. I know there are certain like subconscious psychological and actual physical effects. Like I know a lot of people talk about this idea of how these extreme events basically hijack your amygdala. And your amygdala is just like firing, 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 firing. So like I read a book a number of years ago called The Body Keeps Score. And it kind of talked about like a lot of these modern day brain scans. Why do you react with that kind of startle response first? And it's because your amygdala is actually shorter. Like the brain path, like the circuit path for your amygdala is shorter than your like prefrontal cortex. So that like process is faster. And the theory is evolutionarily like the people that had that shorter path lived because they reacted quicker to these kind of responses. But if that pathway is constantly just like pedal to the metal, you basically are constantly in this kind of fight flight stage. You're kind of outside of this like window of tolerance. You're like hypo aroused or hyper aroused or something like that. You know, I'm bastardizing these names, but basically a lot of it has to do with brain chemistry and the actual structure of your brain and how you can hijack these things. And so how do you kind of undo that is a very long process of therapy there's all these different techniques now that they use to try to understand how to treat trauma. And trauma, to your point, is not necessarily storming the beaches of Normandy. It sounds like less maybe romantic to say trauma can be like an emotional breakup, like a romantic breakup that's extremely emotionally taxing, a divorce, like your divorce or maybe your parents' divorce, even humiliations in somewhat like lower stakes environments traditionally, like oh you're a kindergartner and the teacher ridicules you. Like these can literally alter your brain chemistry in like very very significant ways that literally cause lasting effects.
Final question for you
Hmm.
before we tie it up. And this is kind of related to trauma and alterations in people's brains. What do you
Sure.
think it will do to people who watch a very violent UFC exchange on the front lawn of of a national symbol like the White House? Will that permanently change people at a conscious or a subconscious level beyond just pearl clutching? Obviously, there will be pearl clutching. We'll all read about it in the Atlantic and the New York Times.
The
But
Atlantic.
what's actually going to happen to people who watch just blood all over the people mopping up blood, or someone gets like KO'd. Just,
Yeah, I have zero
right in
doubt.
front of the White House.
I have zero doubt there's going to be a whole generation of young boys whose dads are excited about this, and it will have a enduring impact on them at a like foundational psychological level. I believe that 100%. I think that it may actually be a good thing. Like there could be a lot of like father son bonding. There could be a lot of like, hey, I want to grow up and be someone, not necessarily a barbarian or something like that, but like someone who is tough and can defend the ones that I love. I think there's going to be a lot of that. I think there's going to be people who are there. I mean, come on, this has got to be like an incredible event. Like I could vividly remember first time I walked in the big house at Michigan. I mean, I'm not even a football fan, but I remember walking in and just being like, oh wow, like this is a real stadium. I remember the first time I went to the Brickyard, Indianapolis 500. You're just like, what is going on? Like it's like a 2.5 mile ring of asphalt, and cars drive what 220, 230 miles an hour. Like I think there's going to be a lot of that for the people who are there for sure. I don't know. I mean, are there going to be some people who this like shocks and scores them and this, that, and the other? There might be a few, but I think that this is going to be background noise in terms of the normal stimuli that you talk a lot about on the show. That is just part of everybody's TikTok feed, everybody's YouTube streaming. So that's my
Yeah.
thoughts, man. Do you want to wrap it up and share your thoughts?
Yeah, I wish they would have just. I wish Biden and Trump would have just fought each other with folding chairs. You know, like
Oh wow. Okay.
that. You know,
He's
I'm
ending on
not
that
saying
note.
the publication does not endorse that, but me personally, I'm like maybe that would have been the way to do this. I don't know. I'm concerned. All depictions of violence, especially when paired with state imagery, can be very powerful. Especially ones the
Yeah.
more subconscious it is, the more powerful it is. And my hope is that this event doesn't exacerbate underlying aggressive tendencies in the population, regardless of their political orientation.
I think that's very well put, Don. And I think with that, we will wrap. So this has been another episode of the Memetic Review with Don and Brederick, your hosts. If you like this podcast, sign up, subscribe, hit the like button, hit the thumb up, whatever it is nowadays, depending on the platform. Send us love
RSS
mail,
coming soon.
send us hate mail. RSS is coming soon. Thank you for that announcement. Yep. And until next week, we will see you then.